G'day, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honour to be back with you again this year at your Word Conference over in the Netherlands. It's a real pity, isn't it, that we couldn't be together because, you know, I really enjoyed you guys last year. I enjoyed meeting you guys, having meals with you and with your leaders and your pastors and all the other speakers and forming some long-lasting relationships. So it was awesome to be there. But you know what? We can still get together anyway because of the video conferencing these days. It's all at our fingertips, isn't it? So we might as well maximize the benefits of this, you know, obviously caused by COVID and all this other nonsense that's going on. But nevertheless, here we are. Okay, now I've only got 1 hour to teach you stuff this year compared to 3 days and 3 nights last year. So I better try to make it worthwhile for you. So we might as well get straight into it, eh? The topic this year is God's supernatural provision, which I love talking about because I have had such a lot of first-hand experience with it, and I've learned to rely on it. I've learned to trust God for it, and I've learned to be able to take a lot more risk, faith-based risk, in other words, because I know that as long as I'm doing it God's way, I'm going to get that supernatural provision. Okay, and I also know that it brings so much good into this toxic world, and I'll cover off on that as we go. So if we're talking about supernatural, guys, that means we should be thinking about things which are beyond our natural capacities. Okay, so supernatural by its definition means beyond or above natural, or in scientific terms it means impossible. Okay, so that's what supernatural means. So for example, you know, as a demonstration of supernatural, which you guys may remember from last year, I told you that my natural ability as an entrepreneur was set at $2 million maximum per annum in business. Okay, that is what the Lord physically built into my DNA as a natural gifting. Just like some of you guys, you know, you're gifted singers. I heard you singing last year. You're awesome. Your musos there. So you have that gifting, and God puts a measure of that into your DNA. And there would be some gifted artists probably in your congregation, and there would be some gifted mathematicians or whatever it might be. But without any supernatural intervention, I was always able to create a $2 million company or business, but never went above that. Okay, so for the people who didn't attend last year, just listen to this little stretch of information. For the first 22 years that I was in business, I owned 13 different companies or businesses, if you like. Not all at once like I do now. At the moment we own 32 companies and trusts, and it's crazy. But in those days it was just one at a time. Okay, so these 13 different businesses were in 9 different industries in 6 different countries. So you can see I had stuff going on all over the place. I wasn't just stuck on one thing that I never got very good at. It was any business that I did I never got very good at. Okay, so no matter how much I tried, no matter which country I went to, I still never broke through the $2 million mark in any of those enterprises, even though I was a Christian for 15 of those 22 years. All right, so I was a Christian, okay, but God still didn't give me any massive supernatural favor. All right, even though I was tithing for all of those 15 years that I was a Christian, and even though I was the biggest funder of my church for over 10 years, and I know this because I was on the board and I could see how much was coming in, so I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you, even though I was doing all this stuff, I never actually broke through my natural ability. There was nothing supernatural in terms of the provision from God. But very suddenly, in late 1999, when I was completely broke with no cash and I had $76,000 worth of credit card debt, the Lord applied His favor, and through His supernatural provision, my business has rocketed up to a $100 million company in value in 2 years and 7 months. Okay, so by 2003, I had a $100 million company. And this was way beyond my $2 million capacity, okay? This was supernatural provision, obviously. It had to be. It was impossible for me to do it. I tried for 22 years. Okay, so why did God suddenly do this after all those years of toiling? And what would it take for Him to do the same for all of you in this audience at the Word Conference today? Now, incidentally, it doesn't have to be supernatural provision in business. That's just the my audiences around the world are generally business audiences, but there'd be a lot of you guys that aren't in business. I know that from meeting you last year. So it can be in any area of your life. You can become a supernatural singer. You can become a supernatural artist. You become a supernatural pastor, a supernatural politician. It doesn't matter, okay? The principles remain the same no matter which mountain of influence that you are on, okay? So as I mentioned last year, the reason this happened to me was because in late 1999, my understanding of Christianity changed from just being your typical generic Christian going to church on Sundays and tithing and trying to be pious and all that kind of stuff. It changed to understanding the concept of doing God's will, God's way in the marketplace. I realized God had one great big overarching vision for mankind, okay? And that was to bring the kingdom of God into the earth. And within that great vision, he put each one of us on earth to do specific assignments which all contribute to that great vision. Okay, so that is God's will for us as individuals. It is the reason he created you and me and all of us, each of us differently. And he actually equipped each of us differently for certain assignments, okay? And I realized that if we figured this out and actually engaged in those assignments, which he had put us on earth to do in the first place, and as long as we did them God's way, in other words, righteously, and I mean righteously in business, righteously in the marketplace, if you like, okay? As long as we did them his way, he would apply his favor, and the supernatural multiplication came with that favor. So in other words, God is, it's all about doing God's will, God's way, and not just being a generic Christian. And as I did that, my business went crazy and grew very, very quickly. Now, in 2004, God expanded my assignment, and my ministry, which is called Kingdom Investors, or KI, was born. And I began to teach my audiences, who were mainly business people, all about doing God's will, God's way. And they also began to break through, and their businesses began to multiply supernaturally. So now here we are, 21 years later, and I hear business coaches and marketplace ministers and even pastors and so on, all using my words, God's will, God's way, all over the world, which is so awesome because it means people are finally getting the message and are actually doing God's will for each of them as individuals, okay? So as a result, the momentum of all of that for change in the marketplace is steadily building. Guys, if we all did God's will, God's way, the kingdom of God would come into the marketplace